title of this sermon is, The Key to Faith is Gratitude When We Least Feel Grateful. Let me share 3 statements. The key to faith is gratitude. Gratitude is mostly about dealing with loss. The key to life and faith is therefore the ability to deal with loss. Today's Thanksgiving Sunday, in which we think about being a thankful and grateful people. Today is also the first Sunday of Advent, in which we think about hope. Hope which is like light breaking into the midst of darkness. In alignment with both of these themes, we'll be looking at Psalm 46, which is almost always identified as a psalm of thanksgiving. It could also be called a prayer of thanksgiving. However, it is definitely thanksgiving with a twist, and that twist has to do with gratitude in the face of tragedy or loss, but we will get to that in a moment. Shakespeare's plays have this amazing durability. Over the 400 years since he wrote them, they have been performed continually. Through that time, Shakespeare's 4 most performed plays are in order. 1, Romeo and Juliet. 2, A Midsummer Night's Dream. 3, Macbeth. 4, Hamlet. Of these 4, 3 are tragedies, with only A Midsummer Night's Dream, a comedy, being the only non-tragedy in the lot. In the early 1960s, the New York Yankees were the best team in baseball, and the New York Mets were the worst team. Both played in New York City. The Yankees in the Bronx, the Mets in Queens. Yet amazingly, the Mets during those years consistently drew 50% more people to the ballpark than the Yankees. Their popularity was astounding, even earning them the name the lovable losers. How could that be? I heard one sports writer explain it this way. In life, we lose more than we win. People could relate more to the Mets, who lost a lot, than the Yankees, who didn't lose so much, because losing is a huge part of life, and the Mets did it so well. Troy Aikman was among the most successful quarterbacks during the 1990s as he led the Dallas Cowboys to 3 Super Bowl victories. Yet through that time, he openly struggled with depression. I remember reading an interview in which he openly talked about his depression, which at times was severe, even life-threatening. The interviewer asked, "Didn't your success ameliorate your struggle with depression?" And Aikman said, "Not really." He said, winning provided a short-term sort of euphoria that quickly faded. But he said his losses and his failures would continually haunt him. They would run through his head again and again. He could not stop replaying those painful tapes in his mind. On Wednesday night, the day before Thanksgiving, I went on a walk a little before our 10 p.m. curfew. I wanted to send out a meditation and prayer on Thanksgiving Day that focused on gratitude and thanksgiving. Kind of makes sense, right? That's what we do on Thanksgiving. But I wanted one that was honest, true to the scriptures, and felt authentic in light of this dark and difficult season we are in the midst of. I had spent much of Wednesday in vain, hoping to find something that seemed to be just right, but nothing had come. Now, I'm a big believer in epiphanies, those momentary flashes of insight of when the light goes on, where something comes to us seemingly out of nowhere, and it just fits that empty void that we are searching to fill. And much to my surprise, because epiphanies are always surprising and unexpected, an epiphany of sorts came to me. It began with thinking about the key phrase from the 46th Psalm that many of us have heard before. Be still and know that I am God. These words, be still and know that I am God, tap into something about life and faith and God that always stirs our spirits. And based on the nearly universal appeal of these words, I was not surprised that phrase came to me with some energy and expectation. Yet that wasn't the epiphany. The epiphany came as the less well-known first part of the psalm gradually came to me. I had to strain a bit to recall it, since it is not as frequently recited. And while I share these words here now, it came more as an image than it did audibly. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in troubled times. Therefore, we should not fear, though the earth should change, though the mountains tremble and shake, though the waters roar and foam, though the nations are in an uproar, tottering on the edge of collapse. Two things emerged in this image that came to me. First, it sure did reflect the world that I was feeling and wanted to respond to in a Thanksgiving meditation and prayer. Second, that image brought forth a question. How does this description of a dark and tumultuous world connect with those powerful words that come toward the end of the psalm? Be still and know that I am God. What's the connection? How are they connected? One of my pet peeves is that scriptures are often pulled out of context and presented as the answer when answers only make sense when you know the question. This question, how do you get from the dark and tumultuous world that's described in the first part of the psalm to a place of hope and gratitude that is captured by those familiar words and beloved words, be still and know that I am God? That I could not get out of my head on my walk, since I knew the image that emerged in the first part of the psalm, and I knew the culminating words, be still and know that I am God, toward the end, but I couldn't recall what lay in between those two different images. When I got home, a few minutes past the 10 p.m. curfew, I pulled up Psalm 46 to reveal the missing piece in between. Here it is. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Israel is our refuge. He makes wars cease, breaks the bow and shatters the spear, and burning the shield with fire. And this is followed immediately by, be still and know that I am God. It was then that really the enlightenment, the epiphany truly emerged. Was something that I never noticed before. It was this. The 46th Psalm tells not of what God has done or is doing, but instead of who God is. And that ultimately defines what will eventually unfold at some point in the future. Therefore, when we get to the incredibly loved phrase, be still and know that I am God, the world is still in turmoil. The grace, the gratitude, the hope that emerges from that powerful image, be still and know that I am God, is not the result of God making everything right and good. No, it's about finding God as God is before there is any evidence beyond our faith and hope in God. It was then and only then that Psalm 46 emerged as the right prayer for this Thanksgiving. While the world is in the midst of an uproar, and the darkness seems to have the upper hand, we find grace, we find gratitude, we find hope in the stillness. For in the stillness, God is revealed even while the world is still tumultuous and dark. This is an amazing understanding of God and faith and life. First, in the stillness, we are able to know God. Isn't that amazing? When we clear away the distractions of life, God finds the way to become known to us, by us, even within us. Not dependent upon someone telling us a bunch of information about God. Not that such teaching is necessarily a bad thing, but at a minimum, we are not completely dependent upon that. No, in the stillness, we may very well realize that God is very, very near, and that we are at some level able to know at least some of the reality of God. Second, this is not dependent upon the world, and that includes our lives, becoming right or just or acceptable. No, stillness is the only condition identified. In fact, the passage sort of suggests the opposite. While the world and our lives are full of turmoil, be still. And this allows us to know God. Third, the passage reveals an ultimate trajectory in terms of who God is, a God of peace, of shalom, not of war or conflict. And this ultimate trajectory is wonderful. Yet this ultimate trajectory, or this redemption, this moving into alignment of both our lives and our world, is an ultimate destination, but it is not a condition for knowing God. In other words, God shows up while our world and our lives are still in turmoil and darkness. You see, there's a reason why Shakespeare's most beloved play, Romeo and Juliet, is a tragedy, because life includes much that is tragic. There is a reason why people connected with the Mets more than the Yankees in the 1960s, because life includes more losing than winning. There's a reason why Troy Aikman's success didn't prevent him from struggling with loss and failures, because success doesn't neutralize failure. Finally, there is a reason why the central symbol of the Christian faith is one of death, a cross. The promise of our faith has never been that somehow, if we are faithful, if we get it right, that we will be spared tragedy and pain and death. No, that has never been the promise. That was not the promise 3,000 years ago when the 46th Psalm was prayed and God was found in the stillness. It was not the promise 2,000 years ago when Jesus said that if you want to follow me, expect this: you'll be picking up a cross, because that's the way it works. And that is not the promise today. Whether we are in the midst of a pandemic or not, whether the economy is booming or in recession, we are never lifted from all that is tragic in life, never. In fact, faithfulness often involves stepping into the darkness, risking failure and pain, yes, exposing ourselves to tragedy. One of my favorite tragedies comes not from Shakespeare, but from a Jewish kid from New York named Paul Simon. In 1964, Paul Simon wrote one of his most powerful songs. It's about a person who experiences tragedy and thinks that he can make his life safe by avoiding all the sources of pain and hurt. He imagines that if he can retreat from the world, pull away from being connected to people, pulling away from life, he can avoid all pain and all darkness. Let me share the words of the song, which is really a poem. A winter's day in a deep and dark December, I am alone. I've built walls, a fortress deep and mighty that none may penetrate. I have no need of friendship. Friendship causes pain. Its laughter and its loving I disdain. Don't talk of love. If I never loved, I never would have cried. And then comes the title of the song, and it ends with this sort of haunting chorus. I am a rock. I am an island. A rock feels no pain, and an island never cries. No, that is not the promise. The tragic is a part of life. Death is a part of life. While there are some tragedies that we can and should try to avoid, there are other tragedies that come from living in the world, of forming connection and community with others, despite the trajectory of that song. Even though that means that we will experience more pain, more hurt, often feeling the pain of others, but we will also experience infinitely more joy, more love, more peace, and more faith. As last week's retelling of Tolstoy's Martin the Cobbler so beautifully brings to life, Matthew 25. We find a person in Martin who is overwhelmed by tragedy and just wants to die. Yet Martin is transformed by finding Christ present in the darkness, in the despair, and the tragic parts of life that he thought were void of life and hope and God. As Martin reaches out to those who are cold and thirsty and warms them and gives them something to drink. As Martin reaches out to those who are naked and hungry and feeds and clothes them. As Martin reaches out to the strangers and welcomes them. And then Martin hears the voice of the Lord telling him, as you welcomed and connected to each of these, the least of my brothers and my sisters, you welcomed and connected me. Or, as Psalm 46 reveals, while the world is in the midst of an uproar and darkness seems to have the upper hand, we find grace, we find gratitude, we find hope in the stillness. For in the stillness, God is revealed, even while the world is still tumultuous and dark. This is the good news of Thanksgiving and Advent. Amen.